Welcome on into the Utah Blogcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah insider for KSL Sports. Good to be with you guys. Monday, August 24th. We are 10 days away from the season kicking off. Utah versus Idaho. Oh, man. We are so close to football being back. We actually get football this week, college football this week. I need to look up the schedule. I don't even know who's playing, but at least we're getting some college football this week. That's going to be great. Anyways, on today's episode, I want to do basically a stock report. I think I did something like this to start fall camp, maybe after the first week or so, but want to do that again today to kind of recap and I guess assess where I'm at, how I feel things are different from where I felt they were at the beginning of fall camp. And today we also had the opportunity to hear from Utah coordinators and assistant coaches. So some fresh new insights and sound bites, perhaps not on this episode, but coming soon, I'm sure. But want to just dive into this. I don't necessarily have anything to get into beyond that. I wrote the Unloading the Notebook article from today's media availability. You can catch that at kslsports.com. If you want to read through some of my takeaways from today's availability. Again, we got to hear from all of the entire coaching staff except for Morgan Scalley today. We will have the opportunity tomorrow on Tuesday to hear from Coach Scalley and a handful of players. So that'll be what we've got today and tomorrow. And then that's it. So want to do a bit of a stock report. And to start with this, these with the access that we have with some of the practice watching sessions, we only get 20 minutes. It's hard to come away with a lot. So most of these groups are either the same or they're up. And I tried to change the degree at which some of these groups are up, but for the most part, I think we kind of understood where these groups were coming into fall camp. And so this, again, is based on where I thought they were at the start of fall camp and where I think they are now as we exit fall camp and now turn the conversation into season prep with Idaho coming in here 10 days from now. So again, camp is over. Idaho preparation has begun. Utah coaches, gave us an hour, right? We only got 5 minutes, but they provided to us the clearest picture yet on the roster. So I figured let's reset every position group, who's changed my mind, maybe what some of the developments we've seen or heard, kind of that sort of stuff, and where I think Utah is at now that we've come out of fall camp. And so to start, the quarterback, to me, stock is the same here. And that's because I felt good about this group coming into fall camp. I feel good about this group where we are now. And, I've maintained throughout the offseason that I feel like Devon Dampier is the type of quarterback that gives Utah a Big 12 championship pillar, someone to build around that can get you to a Big 12 championship game. I think Devon Dampier has that sort of ability. And as we've gotten through fall camp, just with the developments that he's made, Coach Gunderson specifically singled out, his improvement throwing from within the pocket and the vision that he has, not just as a passer, but in terms of his ability to kind of diagnose, feel what's going on around him, and then still identify things down the field. And I think that's going to be a really important element for Dampier, obviously, this year. He's not going to have the luxury of, 2 first-round offensive tackles blocking the edges for him. He's going to have a new offensive line in front of him. There's going to be more on his plate where, not only does he need to be, a bit more responsible in regards to the pre-snap, diagnosing and getting Utah into the best situations possible, but he's also going to have to be the guy to make up for things that happen around him and in front of him, to overcome some of those mishaps and those types of things. And what Coach McGiven shared today kind of also illustrated his that point as well, that Dev gives McGiven the luxury of not having to be a perfect play caller because of what he's able to do after the snap. He can make things happen even when things break down, and I think that has always been his strength as a quarterback, his ability to create with his legs, to escape from the pocket, and then either generate yardage with his legs, with his running ability, or to get the ball deep down the field. I shouldn't say deep down the field, but get the ball down the field to his playmakers. That was his strength at New Mexico. That continued to be the case, last season, where he just has that ability to make plays. So just kind of more of the same with Dev. Coach Gunderson also singled out the development of Byrd Ficklin, and McGiven shared that he's just too talented and too athletic to keep him off the field. So that gives Utah some depth at quarterback, but also kind of a unique player in Ficklin where they're going to try to get him on the field in different ways. And I'm curious to see what all that looks like. But they feel good about those two. And I think the key here, maybe why I should have maybe put this group up a little bit, because the addition of Brandon Rose, I think, is a super valuable, a sneaky valuable addition for this quarterback room because of what it means for Byrd Ficklin specifically. You don't have to try and protect Byrd. His athleticism is what makes him special. You don't have to, utilize him in bubble wrap, maybe like you did before. Having Rose here as QB3 shores up your depth where you're not having to then it's Dev, it's Byrd, and then it's true freshman. Rose being here, I think, has solidified the depth, given Utah a quarterback with another fantastic arm, somebody that's made a lot of throws over the course of his career in practice, and he's gotten opportunities in games and made the most of them in certain situations and had to overcome certain things in others. So having Brandon Rose back, I think, is a very valuable thing for Utah. It's done a lot to, again, shore up the depth and potentially opens up some possibilities to get Byrd on the field even more than before. And they were already pretty determined to get him on the field prior to. So, yeah, overall, nothing's changed my opinion of Utah's quarterback room, and that's a compliment. I thought Dampier gave Utah championship level quarterback play before camp. I still believe that now. If anything, the addition of Brandon Rose, stock up on the quarterback. But for me, I'll play it fair. I'll call it the same, and say stock here is the same at the quarterback position. Now, one position that this might be the group that has gone up the most from where it was at the fall camp, where it is now, and that's the running back room. With Wayshawn Parker, we know what he did last season. The pink cleat assassin was fantastic last year. Took him some time to take hold of RB1 duties and an RB1 workload, but we saw what he looks like when he has the workload that he had over the final couple months of the season. And from everything that we learned from Steve Saunders and some of the commentary from Atawaya to begin fall camp and talking about the role of the running back expanding, I think Wayshawn Parker is set up really nicely to be a significant engine for this offense. But that's your best player getting better. What's really kind of put the stock up for me with this group is the development of the guys behind him. It's Steve Chavez Soto. It's Daniel Ray. It's Matiaki Helu. It's the true freshman Lamarcus Bell. Having gotten to see those guys in action, and obviously we know that it wasn't 11 on 11. It was, just a shorter period. We didn't get an extended look at these guys. But man, I came away impressed with what I saw from Chavez Soto, what I saw from Lamarcus Bell. And then, with Daniel Bray, we've seen what element he brings to the field last season. We've seen it. We know how explosive he is. Scally said in spring ball that he was the most improved player on the roster. Mark Atuaya said today he's continued to be that bright spot for Utah as well. So you go, that's just those guys. That's before even getting to Matiaki Helu, who Coach Scally said maybe had the best Saturday of the running back groups a couple Saturdays ago. I think this was last Monday's media availability for Scally. So he gives Utah a more physical option. And then we know that Utah is going to incorporate other guys into this running back mix. You know, a guy like Hunter Andrews, who's plenty familiar with the running back job and duties, not necessarily here, but back in high school. That's where he was playing at Katy High School, or excuse me, I think it was Magnolia High School. Katy was Brant Keithy, but Magnolia is the 2.0. So I think, this group for me, based on where we're coming out of fall camp, I'm not declaring it's going to be the best running back group in the Big 12, but I think there's a chance for this group to get into that top three running back rooms in the Big 12. I think there's a chance that, depending on how this all unfolds, there's a lot of depth here. There's a lot of playmaking ability, some explosiveness. I think this group, we haven't talked about it a lot. All of the focus has been on the receivers and the passing game. We've sort of just kind of not necessarily dismissed, but just maybe overlooked this running back group. And I feel like this group coming out of fall camp, there's not a group I feel better about from where it was at the start of fall camp to where it is now. I'm really excited to see this group on the field. And one thing that Coach McGiven talked about was the responsibility to get players touches. And I thought that was going to be difficult at wide receiver. It's now going to be pretty difficult. I mean, outside of Wayshawn, you're going to feed Wayshawn those RB1 carries. But I think incorporating Bray and Chavez Soto and even LaMarcus Bell, and I think that's going to be a pretty tall task now. But I think there's enough complementary work for each of these guys to get them on the field. They bring different skill sets, different dynamics. I'm really excited. Again, stock up for me on this running back room. All right. Let's get to wide receiver. And for me, as difficult as it was, I'm trying not to build the hype too high for this group. I have the stock the same, but here's what I'll add. I came into fall camp feeling more like Utah had a group of receivers where there wasn't necessarily going to be one that stood out above the rest. I felt like there was depth, that it was going to be pretty evenly spread in terms of targets and opportunities. But based on, everything that I've gathered throughout fall camp, I feel like Braden Pegan is going to emerge as that go-to receiver that Utah hasn't had since a Darren Carrington, since a Drez Anderson. He is going to be that type of guy, and I feel like I heard some really encouraging things about the chemistry that Dampier and Pegan seem to have throughout fall camp. So, if there's one thing that I'm, stock up on, it's Pegan stock. I think he's going to be the go-to guy in this group. And Coach Bumpus talked about him not only being that playmaker, but being the leader in that group and being, the sort of player that Bumpus can count on day in and day out. I think that's really big. And that's before even getting to, what Coach McGiven shared about Ricky Johnson and Creed Whittemore, two guys that really stepped up over the course of fall camp. Where they fall in terms of the hierarchy, I don't necessarily know. But the fact that you've got two guys that you brought in from the transfer portal in Pegan and Scholes, two guys with bona fide production and ability, that you have guys like Ricky Johnson and Creed Whittemore pushing for opportunities to get on the field. That's before even mentioning Touchdown Larry and what, his development has looked like this offseason. Again, I talked a lot about the physical development of the big guys. Larry Simmons is one player that I think has really evolved physically, where he's now got the upper body strength and build to compete more consistently on the outside, getting off of press coverage and doing those types of things. And then one player that was singled out by Coach Bumpus was Tobias Merriweather, who finished camp as strongly as anybody, according to him. So, really encouraging things. I'm going to stick with overall. I think stock is the same, but in terms of certain individuals, I think, certain guys, Hagan, Ricky, Creed, those guys have certainly seen their stock go up. So trying to keep it quick because I already went 13 minutes on the quarterback, running back room. Tight end, let's transition there. Tight end, Hunter Andrews, he's the headline. But to me, who else beyond him is going to step up and play a big role for Utah at this tight end spot? That's the big question I have. So we knew that Hunter Andrews was a playmaker. He was kind of the versatile type coming into fall camp. Haven't necessarily heard anything, contrary to that, but figured we would get other players stepping up around him in that room to carve out more opportunities. And maybe that's Noah Benny. Maybe I'm just kind of dismissing him and kind of that role. There's been a lot of talk about the Rhinos in Semi Tawalunga and Sione Motu Apoaka. And I think those guys are going to be really important in certain situations. Coach Scally's even talked about, wanting to get those guys more touches, but just haven't heard it consistently enough throughout fall camp that others actually did, capitalize on those opportunities. So for me, tight end is mostly the same. It's Hunter Andrews, and then everybody else is what it feels like. But it seems like Utah got some development out of guys like Kenai Lopes and Will Money. But who else can contribute this season? I think that's the big question mark that I have for this tight end group. Up front, let's get to the big guys, offensive line. To me, this group is slightly up. The starting five, we'll learn what that is going to be. Coach Gross talked about it today that they haven't necessarily nailed down their starting group. But what it feels like, based on all of the comments about the group and who's been mentioned, it seems like Alex Harrison, Zeraway Williams, Keith Olson, Soatoa Moiai, Kelvin Obot, and then Ike Garcia, Cedric Jefferson still in that mix. Roger Alderman was another player that Gross singled out today. It seems like Utah has 7 or 8 guys that are in this competition for the starting job. And we know that there have been bumps and bruises, guys in and out of practice that have made it difficult to kind of settle in on a starting unit. And maybe that's the case here and why they haven't picked their 5. But it seems like from within that group is going to be the starting unit. Based on things that we've also heard about others, I think individually, Kelvin Obot has seemingly put himself in a position to potentially earn a starting role. Does that happen at tackle? Does it happen at guard? We'll see. Soatoa Moiai is someone that Gross singled out today as a player that has come into camp in the best shape of his life. And for him, that's huge because he's always been upwards 340, 330, somewhere in that range. Him at 320, 315 potentially, that could do a lot to unlock some athleticism, some ability to get out on the perimeter maybe and do some different things. Moiai is such a big body. He's got long arms that I think really give him an advantage. Figuring out what this starting 5 is going to look like is going to be really interesting to see what they ultimately decide, what group they decide to go with. But I do feel like Utah has gotten this down from where it was at the start of camp, where Gross said that they feel they've got 10 guys. I think that's been narrowed down. And this is just me kind of reading the tea leaves, kind of taking it all in. I think they've narrowed this down to, they've got 5, maybe 3 others that factor into the mix here, and they'll decide from here. But they've got 10 days to figure it out. Getting these guys as many reps together, I think, is going to be really important, obviously. All right, let's transition to the defensive side of the ball and start with this defensive end group. And for me, I'm going to go stock up on the edge group, but slightly. For me, it seems like Utah has a pretty solid group of 4 at this spot, which includes Lance Holsclaw, Ethan Day, Cash Dillon, and Paul Fitzgerald. And it starts with Lance Holsclaw. He stepped up as the leader of this group, as a leader of the defense. And, I think his presence means a lot to this group beyond the leadership that he plays with. I think he has the sort of twitch and athleticism to potentially emerge as that, consistent threat off the edge, that would be really valuable if he can capitalize on that. Going back to, my conversation with Steve Saunders, he singled out Ethan Day as a player that completely transformed some of the expectations of him going into this season, which I think is extremely valuable. Day is bulked up to 270, up from 250 that he was at in spring ball. And, he's talked about it where he feels as good as he's ever felt. And at 270 pounds, rushing off the edge, really curious to see what that allows him to do. How does that help him on the edge where, we sort of think of it more as that twitchy position. I think it's going to be interesting to see what Day's role is and how he's able to maximize his potential and the gains that he's made in the weight room. I think that's going to be really important. And then you've got these other guys, Cash Dillon and Paul Fitzgerald. I think Cash is somebody, again, that you start talking about the other guys. Cash has now been in the program for a couple years. He's as physically developed physically as anybody over the last 2 years, as I've seen. He has put in the time, he's put in the work. I think he's in a position to, he's put himself in a position where he's going to be counted on to play a pretty consistent role for this group. And then the X factor of those four is Paul Fitzgerald. And we can go back 2 seasons ago, his first with Utah State, I believe, as a freshman, tallied 8 sacks, generated a handful of pressures. He missed last year due to injury. He suffered a season-ending injury last year. Got back to it this summer, being a full go type of participant. He was able to go through the workouts and those types of things. He's benefited from the Saunders strength and conditioning program as well. Again, each of these guys, man, each of them look like they've upgraded physically. But for me, the X factor here is Fitzgerald. If you can get something out of Fitzgerald where he is sort of the I don't want to say the freebie, but there weren't necessarily big expectations of him even at the start of fall camp for me. And so this is why I have this group as stock up, is because of Fitzgerald. It sounds like he's had some really bright moments in camp where he's sort of displayed the same sort of athleticism and twitchiness. I think that's what Enoke Brechterfield singled out of him today is that he has that sort of the same sort of juice that a Lance Holzclaw does, but he's still 6'4", 250 pounds. He's still a physical body. So, I think this group is going to be really interesting. Health is obviously going to be important. And I think Utah, outside of the John Henry Daly injury last year, Utah was able to maintain the health on the edges last year. That's going to be important again this year. But then can they get some development out of those beyond the guys that we're talking about here? Can they get PJ Taki or Alex Cloward or Fasiale as guys that can contribute at some point this season? I think that's going to be really key here. So stock up on the edge group for me. Defensive tackle, moving inside to the interior of the defensive line. For me, stock is the same. The room, remains pretty promising, but it's still unproven. And, I think they've got the ingredients to really kind of turn this around with Carson Kafusi and Pupu Sepulona. They've been pretty consistent, throughout fall camp as guys that Utah is looking to kind of, carry the torch here. Jaire Moe, I think if there's one individual in this group that's raised his stock, he's done it the most. From where he was, when he joined the program back in January, seeing him in spring ball and seeing him now, big time stock up for Jaire Moe. I think he's in a position to really kind of step into not just a productive role, but almost a role of leadership with how he just conducts himself, how he carries himself. There's a quiet confidence about him that I really appreciate that always seems to bode well in that defensive tackle room. And I think he's just perfectly suited as a Utah defensive tackle. I think he's going to surprise some folks with what he's able to do. And then a player Coach Ellis singled out today, which I found, pleasantly surprising, was Dylan Battle. And, he was a true freshman last year. He was one of the 5 defensive tackles that Utah brought in last season who we didn't see much of at all. He redshirted last year, didn't get much playing time on special teams or anything like that. But when Coach Ellis talked about him, he said that he's one of the biggest risers from where he was in spring to where he is now. And I think that's a huge development because he's a 320, 330-pound defensive tackle who has athleticism. There's some twitch there when you go back to his high school film. So if you can get some added further development out of him, I think that that would go a long way. For me, this group is the same because never felt like the group as a whole really came together, I guess. It's just kind of, it's tough because there weren't those declarations that the Utah defensive tackle group has made significant strides. There's been some developments, there's been some individuals singled out, but to me, the group is still largely the same from where it started in fall camp to where it is now. So, we'll see. Again, the ingredients are promising, but still unproven, and I think they're gonna go through some bumps and bruises to start the season. But ultimately, if there's a group that I would buy stock in between now and the end of fall camp in terms of their development, it would still be this tackle group, just because I do think these young guys in that group have legitimate potential. So that's what I've got there. Let's move behind the defensive line to that linebacker group. And for me, this group stock remains the same. Jonathan Hall is still the guy that they're counting on to be sort of experienced playmaker in this group. Trey Reynolds, he is kind of the guy that nobody talks about, but is just shows up, does his job, has the trust of the coaching staff, and I think that's really significant. He's probably gonna be the consistent dude for this defense, the guy that you can count on to do his job day in, day out. That is Trey Reynolds to a T. So it feels like you've got, your established starting duo in Hall and Reynolds. And then, Cyrus Polu came into fall camp with high expectations. And based on everything that we've, gathered over the course of the last couple of weeks, he's continued to showcase those flashes. But for him, as it is with any first or second year player, it's building that consistency and building just the maintaining the level of play at which coaches think you can play at. And so for him, I think that's the process that we're in now. And fortunately for him, having Hall and having Reynolds there as two veterans, huge for him and for Coach Swan to still kind of get him into the mix, get him into the action, and finding different ways to complement each other with those guys. And then the other linebacker that seems to have established himself as a rotational piece, which I think we all kind of just assumed, but Elijah Ellis has put himself in that top four with linebacker. So Utah's got some depth here where they've got a two deep at linebacker. Can they get added development from guys behind him in Taysom Reed and Brock Fanoy-Moana? That's going to be just as important over the next couple of weeks, over these first few weeks of the season, right? Potentially getting some development there with those young guys. But to me, the stock is the same. I think the linebacker question is no longer whether Utah has enough good players. I think they feel good about this group. There's a lot of potential with Cyrus and Elijah to add some dynamic elements to this linebacking group, which I'm really fascinated to see what that looks like. But overall, I think the stock is the same, and that's not a bad thing at all. Transitioning to the next group, cornerback. If it wasn't for the running backs, I would say the cornerback group is the group that I feel has made the next biggest improvement in terms of the stock here. And for me, that's due entirely to Elijah Reed, who I think he has the physical ability, the athletic ability, and just is really suited to play Utah's coverage, preferred method of coverage, and that's press man coverage. I think Reed has all the potential to emerge as the top corner in this group. I think gaining the experience he gained last year at Akron, where maybe he wasn't utilized the same way. Maybe he was utilized a little bit more off ball in coverage. I think coming here, he's found a situation where his traits, what he does best, I think it's a great marriage between what he brings to the table and what Utah asks of their cornerbacks. I think he's going to be set up really well. So, I know that Reed and Pegan had a lot of good battles pretty consistently, a good back and forth. And I think that says a lot of where Reed is right now as a cornerback. And then, behind him, you've still got Scooby Davis, who I think plays a really important role with this group as the nice complement to somebody like Elijah Reed. He's the experienced guy. He's somebody that seemed to come into his own over the final half of the season. Can he now take that next step as a corner himself? That's a big positive for me is having him and not necessarily him needing to be the guy. But now you've got Reed and Scooby, who I think complement one another really well. And then you've got James Chenault, who I think, coming into fall camp, my expectation was that Chenault was going to emerge as the guy starting opposite of Scooby, but it's been Reed who's taken control of that group from what it sounds like. But Chenault, coming here from USF, he played a lot of press man coverage. And I think him coming here fits this scheme really well. So Utah has depth here that I think is real. They've had players emerge, but they've got depth with Reed, with Scooby, with Chenault. And then you still have J.C. Hart, who, has flown under the radar through camp, but he's still been in that mix, competing for opportunities with Reed and with Chenault. So I think Utah feels really good about what they've got there. At least Shaw does. And he's talked about it before as well. He feels like there's elite potential here. It's just going to take them a long time to get there. It's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I think that perfectly sums up my feelings on this group because I'm buying the stock on this group for sure. Last group is the safeties. And to me, stock remains the same. And I'm gonna include the nickelback position here so we can talk about Rock Caldwell. We can talk about, just the kind of the versatility in that room. But you've got the three guys in Jackson Benny, Rabbit Evans, and Nate Ritchie. Those guys are the foundation of this safety group. And what's great is you can utilize all three on the field at the same time. And then you incorporate somebody like Rock Caldwell, who played the nickel spot all throughout spring ball, all throughout fall camp. Suddenly you've got a lot of size and a lot of length and a lot of ability that, gives you flexibility in getting different combinations on the field. And that's before even mentioning some of the young guys in this group that have also, had their names mentioned over the course of fall camp. Guys like, obviously, Nate Tillman is someone that we're all expecting to sort of work his way into a bit of a rotation potentially this season. I still buy that. But you've got Manny Fuller, you've got Davis Andrews, you've got Marcus Wemberly. These are all guys that have had moments throughout fall camp. I wouldn't be surprised to see these guys get on the field at some point in different points of the season. Davis Andrews in particular because of, his combination of size and what that allows potentially Utah to do with him. So I already liked the safety room coming into fall camp. Nothing's really changed my opinion in terms of its potential, but I really like this group coming into fall camp, and I still like it a lot coming out of fall camp. So love the flexibility here. So again, just to kind of summarize everything, quarterback, same, maybe slightly up with Brandon Rose. Running back, the biggest stock up coming out of fall camp for me. Wide receiver, the same. Tight end, the same. Offensive line, slightly up. Edge, up. Defensive tackle, the same. Linebacker, the same. Cornerback, if it wasn't for the running backs, cornerback would be the biggest riser. And then safety, the same. So that's what I've got here. I thought, today's insights from coaches was great. I thought it provided us a little bit more clarity. I'm not anticipating us getting a depth chart between now and the time the ball is kicked off against Idaho in 10 days, but that's totally fine. We'll have this figured out by the time we get there. So yeah, so that'll do it for me on this episode. Appreciate everybody that's read the articles, that's chimed in on the tweets, that's replied to the YouTube videos, that downloads the podcast. It means a lot to me. It's been a lot of fun getting through fall camp. We are inching closer bit by bit to the season kicking off. I cannot wait. We're going to get into more of our regular season flow here. We'll do some live episodes as well. We've got a lot coming for sure. Really looking forward to this season. Feeling good about where we're at. And so we'll be back on Wednesday. We'll have the Wednesday episode out on Wednesday, just like we're dropping the Monday episode on the Monday. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. We'll be back at it on Wednesday.